Anyway. All right, guys. Hey, welcome to another episode of Mediocre Dads. I'm your host, Quan. I go by Q, of course. And on this episode of Mediocre Dads, I am joined by a special guest. This guest all guests are special, right? All guests are special, but in their own form, in their own fashion, right? Because they bring something different to the table. And we all have our own experiences, our own stories. And I say this every time because I just want to emphasize that all guests are special, but they're special in their own way, right? So with this guest today, his name is Simon. He is a podcast host. He is a social worker. And of course, of the most important job of all, he is a dad. And, we're going to get into I got several different topics I want to go kind of get into with him. But, of course, Mediocre Dads is meant for more of a flowing conversation. So if we don't get into some of it, it's okay. If you do have any questions of him, of course, his information will be in the description below. You can reach out to him or comment below on the video and we can interact and have that conversation. Before I get too far deep into that and all that, subscribe to my channel type of stuff, right? I'll do that at the end. That's, it's cheesy stuff. But I want Simon to kind of take a chance to opportunity here to introduce himself and kind of just tell the audience who you are and some of the things you do.
Yeah, Quan, thanks so much for having me on the show. It's good to see you again. You were a guest on my podcast, the Mindful Man podcast, very recently. The episode hasn't quite come out yet, but we look forward to that in the future.
Absolutely.
And if anyone quite can't figure out the accent, yes, I am from Australia, the land down under. I haven't been bitten by an insect, a bug or a snake so far today. We're having that chat off air. But yeah, I'm a social worker. I'm a dad of two. I've got a 7-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. Absolutely love being a dad. And, I'm in the work that I do, and I work with men as a therapist, I'm often speaking to dads about how hard parenting is and the relationships aspect between our partners and our children as well. So it's something that is quite topical for me and something that comes up quite regularly. And I am by no means an expert. I am just a dad just trying to figure it out, just like the rest of us. So yeah, really looking forward to being here and having a chat about all things fatherhood.
That's awesome. Hey, yeah, look, I was gonna say it before that he's Australian, but I like to surprise y'all. I like to keep you on edge. You know what I mean? So, but no, it's fun because I've actually I reached out to somebody else who I wanted to have on the show for a future time, and I didn't know it at the time, but messaging them and they seemed to always email me back at odd hours, and then and I was just like, wow, it's so strange. But whatever, if you're awake, do your thing, and. It's a female. She specializes in co-parenting and other things. And but anyway, I was messaging her. She's like, yeah, so I'm in Australia, and I was like, that totally makes so much sense now. Like weird hours, they're like you're emailing me, and I'm like, I'm awake because I'm just a night owl, but like, why are you awake? You know what I mean? So it was funny, but. Yeah. Anyway, nonetheless, so kind of just getting right into it. You are a social worker, and how did that come to be? Right? Did you always want to be a social worker? Did you become a social worker because of the dad aspect or the men aspect? Like, how did that all come to be?
Yeah, so I'm a late social worker, so I'm 40, now, and found social work as a mature age student, actually. So growing up, I had mental health conditions, and I've had mental health conditions for over 3 decades of my life, which makes me sound really old and feel really old when I say that. But it's true. And growing up, coming towards the end of high school, I remember saying to myself, I want to work with people just like me, but I didn't know what that profession was. Like, I didn't have words for mental health back then. And funnily, I actually picked a social science degree with a major in psychology. And I thought, well, maybe psychologists, I think they work with people who are just like me. Again, didn't know what mental health was. And I started that degree, and ultimately dropped out of that degree in the second year because it came to a subject around statistics and maths, and I was terrible at that at school. And I'm like, nah, this is too hard. I'm going to go do something else. So I switched my majors and did anthropology, the study of culture. And wow. I didn't know where that was going to take me. The reason I picked that was there was no math subjects and there was no exams. so
I would have done the same thing. I would have done the same thing.
I could go to the bare minimum of courses, then go back to work. Actually, I was probably more interested in going to work and earning some money at the time than actually being at university. So yeah, that's what I did. I landed in the public service. So I became a public servant after that. I don't know how that happened, but it did. And then about probably 8 years into my career, I felt like I needed more in life. I needed to do something with more meaning and more purpose. And I had a lot of amazing jobs in the public service, really interesting stuff, but it just didn't light me up like the way that I was hoping my career would. And so I ultimately went to my local university and had a chat with the careers counsellor. I said, look, I want to work in the mental health space. By now, I knew what mental health was because I'd been diagnosed a few years earlier. How do I do that? And I don't want to also go back and do another 4-year undergraduate degree because I've already done that. And so we found a Masters of Social Work, and we explored that. And what drew me to that is, A, I could work in the mental health space with that degree. But B, it was very flexible, and there was a lot of opportunities in a broad range of careers like child protection, hospital work, aged care, into social policy, community development, a whole range of things. So if I got bored, which I often do very quickly, I can pivot and go do something else for a while. Yeah, so I did that, and a couple of years ago, finished that degree, while trying to juggle my full-time job and parenting and all sorts of things, and ultimately set up my own private practice dedicated to supporting men with their mental health and disability. And now finally living that dream that I had way back in my teens of wanting to do something and help people just like me.
Wow, that's awesome. And I have a friend, a good friend of mine. He is in social work himself right now. Well, he's actually finishing his master's program. I think he should be done here in the next month, or he might be already be done. But he, it's just kind of a little bit about me, I guess, if you will. But me and him we were hanging out, we were talking when I first met him. He was telling me all about social work, and I was like, hey man, tell me more about the social work thing. I was like, I'm really interested in this. So I almost chose my master's as for social work, but God has me going down a different path. And my biggest thing is I want to help people, and I think that's what drew you to social work as well, is that passion to want to help people. Because I think it's so easy for people to say, yeah, I want to help people, but then a lot of us, we just don't know how. We don't know what that looks like or where to start. And so you mentioned you yourself had, you had been diagnosed and were dealing with mental issues or concerns early on in your life. If you don't mind, can you tell us kind of some of those, what those were and how that impacted, one, being a dad in the beginning, especially when you have newborns, but then two, how have you kind of navigated to the point where you're like, hey, I feel more free and I'm able to do what I'm doing now, especially right now. I would look at you or see something I would never know you had any of those things in your background.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the beauty about mental health, or not the beauty, it's a weird way to call it, the beauty about mental health, is that it's an invisible thing. You don't see it, and a lot of us, and particularly guys and dads, we wear the mask that really well, that we're okay and that nothing's going to faze us. Beneath that mask, a lot of us are hurting, a lot of us are empty or struggling, and we've grown up with this thought or this belief or this value that boys and men don't cry and show emotions, that we're tough and strong and so forth. And so my diagnosis came at 28 years old, after about 2 years of my now wife. I don't want to say the word nagging, but that's what it basically was. It was like, go get help. Yeah. And for 2 years, I deflected. I said, no, if there's an issue, you can deal with it. You go see someone. You go talk to someone. But after about 2 years of that gentle encouragement, should I say, I thought I had this light bulb moment of thinking, you know what? I've been dealing with whatever's going on inside for 20 years. And so I started around 8 years old. So for 20 years, not talking about it, not dealing with it, I think maybe now's the time that I actually need to go and get help. And so that was a really freeing moment when I reached out to my doctor and then a psychologist after that, and got these diagnoses of depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder. And all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I had a label or a name for the things that I had experienced over 20 years prior to that. And those 20 years were really tough. It started off as a bit of a personality quirk type thing. I was doing these obsessive and compulsive behaviors that I didn't really understand why I was doing it, but I also didn't have the words or the language or a role model, like a father figure, for example, to go and share what was going on. I was too scared to talk about it. But over the years, it evolved into something really dark and sinister, which ultimately nearly, had me thinking about, whether I want to be on this earth anymore, because it was just becoming too much. But yeah, becoming getting to 28, getting that diagnosis, put a lot of things in perspective in terms of what was going on around men's mental health, about my mental health, about mental health in general, giving me the words to express what's going on and start the process of, I guess, essentially recovery. And that's what we talk about in mental health is recovery, going from your darkest day to living a life full of well-being and wellness and so forth. And so that happened well before kids, all that stuff. But mental health challenges continued, and they still do today. It's not something that I'm necessarily going to be cured of, but it's something that over the years I get better at managing. And that's that realization that A, it's okay to not be okay. And then B, when I'm not feeling okay, what are my support systems? So it's usually checking my medication, going into therapy, doing, checking out my self-care, so doing more exercise, eating better, all these types of things. And so fatherhood, though, what that did was it put a spotlight on our family's mental health and our family's well-being, because, that we had kids just before COVID. And I remember COVID, the year, actually my daughter was only a newborn during that COVID year and all the lockdowns. And my wife had taken the 12 months off for maternity leave to essentially be mummy and daughter and have all these beautiful dates and do all these things. And then we were locked down for pretty much the whole year. And so we couldn't do that. And just seeing how the family navigates that, but also noticing when my mental health isn't great, it really does impact the family unit as well. So I'm grumpy, I'm grouchy, I'm short with my kids. And a lot of that I'm discovering is it's almost automatic responses to their behavior. And it comes from what I viewed as parenting from my mum and dad, growing up. So if we messed around growing up, mum and dad, particularly dad, would be pretty hard on us. They'd give us a bit of a whack, or, if we said a curse word, we'd get the soap in the mouth. And it was growing up in the 80s, 90s and 90s. That's what I experienced. And so many people experienced that as well. And so when I became a parent, I noticed myself yelling, for example. My dad used to yell straight off the bat, and start yelling at us because I had, me and three brothers. So you can imagine the kind of household that was.
Chaos.
Chaos, absolutely. Sorry for my mum. So much testosterone in that house. But yeah, I remember automatically doing things that I didn't agree with, like the yelling stuff. And I remember, other things that have happened along the way. And a lot of that was my own stresses and me not dealing with my own stuff. And so my kids helped me put a spotlight on that and recognize that, when I go to therapy, I need to do the homework. I actually need to come away from the therapy, and which is funny because now I'm a therapist, I'm giving my guys homework all the time and they never do it. But I got to do that homework. You've got to do the homework to work on yourself. And so that's really important. But also I've got to try different things to manage my wellness. Just going to therapy isn't going to fix it. You've got to actually embody it all day, every day in everything that you do. And so, that's about saying yes more to the kids instead of no. Trying to make more time for them to manage my self-care. So am I working too much as a self-employed guy? Yeah, I do work a lot. And so when they come in the room, it's about going, it's time for some dad time, with my kids, and not dad the worker type thing. And so they're really good at, keeping us accountable in our parenting journey as well. And it all comes down to my mental health. If I'm stressed, I notice it on how I'm interacting with the kids, and it's not a great thing to see and feel as a social worker as well. So as a social worker who's a therapist, I tell all my clients, how to manage their well-being and how to have healthy relationships with their partner and kids. But sometimes I go home and I forget all that because I'm tired and I'm grumpy, and I do things and say things that make me feel like a fraud. I should know better. I'm a therapist. I'm a dad. I should know better. But I think that just shows that we're all human. And fatherhood is a human thing. It's something that we don't get a book when we become a dad and say, this is how you do it. It's something that evolves over time. And a lot of that comes with self-reflection and thinking about how we were parented and growing up and the things that we like as parents and the things that we don't like as parents, but also allowing our sons and daughters to express themselves, be their own versions of themselves. Because as someone with mental health conditions, and particularly the OCD stuff, I can be a bit of a helicopter parent. So it's about me letting go and letting them explore and maybe get hurt and fall down, and I don't have to stop them and all that type of stuff. So I've just verbally diarrheaed all this stuff about fatherhood, but I think that's the beauty of fatherhood. It isn't
Yeah,
straightforward. Yeah.
100%. I think, and there's, I think there's not a book on how. I know there's several books on fatherhood, right? And they're applicable in many different ways, but I think there's not an actual manual to it, because I think that every kid is different. Every child requires a different form of parenting than, say, this is the standard form of parenting, if you will. You know what I mean? Some kids are more sensitive than others, and so they require a lot more love and gentleness. Some kids are like my second daughter, who is opposite of gentle, and she is ready to smack anybody in the face. You guys all can get these hands, you know what I mean? So she, like, and I give her all this love, similar to, because I want to, my first daughter, Nevaeh, she's very sensitive, but then I do that to my second daughter, and she's kind of like, get off me, bro. Like, what? I punch you in the mouth. You know what I mean? Like, you just like, get off me. And, and it's funny because it's just like this two different personalities, and I can't do what I do for my oldest and for my second, so I think that's why there's no manual, because every child's different. They require something different. So you being a social worker, working with with parents and dads, in particular, do you find yourself, overanalyzing what you do because you're giving advice, or I don't know if you call it advice, because you're recommendations. I don't know how you phrase that, but you're giving people insight and explaining to them how the best way to approach things and whatever issues they're having within their lives. Do you find yourself overanalyzing yourself to be like, oh, I'm doing this, I need to stop all of this right now, or else, right?
Yeah, and it's often after the fact, though. So it's like that shame and guilt piece afterwards, after I've automatically snapped and yelled at, because they're yelling, and now we're all yelling,
Yeah.
And so, and it's funny,
stop
when I'm
yelling!
in a session...
Everybody stop yelling!
That's...
I know I'm yelling, but everybody stop it.
And then my wife starts yelling at me. It's like, what are you doing? Yeah. But when I'm in session with a client, like, I get really laser focused. Everything seems so clear. I'm the clinician. I've learned all this stuff, and then I can bring in some of that lived experience stuff as a dad. But, as I said before, you get home at the end of a day and all that goes out the window because you go into automatic mode, and maybe you're tired, you're stressed from the end of the day. I've yelled because they're yelling, for example. And then I get this immense, I guess, shame and guilt, because I feel like I should know better as that therapist, and I've learned all this stuff. But also, as a modern dad, I also know where I want, my kids to grow up in the kind of world where I want them to grow up. And there's a lot of talk here in Australia at the moment, say for example, around family and domestic violence, and it's huge at the moment. We've had a few incidences in the media, and they're talking about it on the radio, on the news, and there's a lot of people pointing the finger at men, the modern men, and particularly dads, about how are you raising your kids. And so, thinking about my mental health story, and I want my son to grow up and my daughter to grow up in a world where it's okay for them to express at a young age what's going on, and that they're going to get help. They're not going to be turned away and told to harden up and all that type of stuff. So when I do these things, it feels like I'm going against what I'm trying to achieve with my own mental health, but also Mindful Men as a business as well. Like I do this, and every time I think of Mindful Men, I think of my son. And him being older and being a mindful man in himself. And so, I get a lot of that shame. But I think, so that's where the beauty about social work, though, is it's enabled me to look at myself and critically reflect on my life and, and the world around me. And, with a few theoretical frameworks, understand a bit more about attachment at the younger years, and this thing called like systems type theories, where, I love that kind of stuff. Like, how does our entire world, how do we interact with that? And how does that interact with us? And how does that shape who we are as well? And so I've got all this theoretical knowledge that I want to use, and then I don't use it, and then I do use it, and it's a big hot mess. And often I feel like an absolute mediocre dad. Like, I'm just like, man, I suck at this. But, they keep telling me they love me, and I keep telling them. We come back and we apologize if we need to, or, we make peace, and then off we go again. It's another cycle. That's fatherhood, really. So,
the thing about especially younger kids is they forget. And it's crazy because, for you, I'll not initially you, but for me especially, it lives in my head. I can think of like 5 things I've done wrong today, and I can remember 5 things or 10 things I've done 10 years ago, or not 10. My daughter's not 10 years old. 5 years ago, right, or 3 years ago. I can remember all those things, but my daughter, she don't remember any of that. You know what I mean? So for her, a new day is just like a clean slate, and it's not to say, hey, forget those things. It's just, almost doing better. And that's the whole point of Mediocre Dads, right? Like as I tell people, where being mediocre is a choice and you have to refuse to be mediocre. And a new day is a new opportunity to do better than you did yesterday. And so, I can think of a moment, kind of going back real quick for something that you said. I can think of a moment where, as parents, we really like that control, or I won't say like, but we have this control thing over, where we have to be in control of everything around us, especially as men. I think that's just kind of part of our nature, where we have to be in control of things. And one of those things that I noticed for me was my daughter. She was like 3 or 4, and we're out at this place, and it has this huge park, and there's all these kids. This is like 50 to 70 kids on this smaller playground, and they're all running around. Some of them are older, doing their thing, and I'm ready to jump in at any given moment. But I'm also sitting back because I'm like, this is a growing moment for her, and it's like if I interfere, if I mess up this moment and just interfere completely, she won't grow from this. She won't know how to almost navigate. How does she introduce herself to new people? How does she interact with older kids, younger, all these different things, and getting to know people, I'll be very frank with you. I sat there on the side, and internally I am in tears. Outwardly, I'm fighting every single ounce of tears. It hurts me so bad because I want every kid to play with my daughter. I want every kid to just give her attention and just, oh, you're so adorable. You know what I mean? Like that's what I wanted for her. But I also know, like, that's not the world, and I can't unfortunately just force everything around her to happen. So for you mentioned having OCD, and that, I know it's, what is it? OCD, obsession compulsive, or I'm sorry. What does OCD stand for again?
No, you got it. Obsessive compulsive disorder.
There we go. I was, for whatever reason, it didn't sound right as I was saying it, but in my head, that's all I was saying. So with dealing with OCD, and I know for some people, a lot of that is, like I said, change is hard, and control. Do you find yourself in those moments where you're watching, or you're seeing, witnessing your kids go through a growth moment, and you're like, I need to intervene, and you've stopped yourself, or you haven't stopped yourself? Do you have experience like that? And if you do, what did you feel like? What was that? What were those feelings as it was happening?
Yeah, it comes back to that helicopter stuff. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what OCD is, it starts with an obsessive thought. It's an intrusive thought that comes in, and most people can get it, or actually, in fact, most of us, if not all of us, get intrusive thoughts. It's just that most of us can let them go and go, you know what, that's just rubbish. I don't have to pay attention to that. An OCDer will hold on to that obsessive thought and that intrusive thought, and they would obsess about it. And that obsession creates a huge amount of anxiety and distress. And the only way to alleviate that is with the compulsive behavior. So that's the action that we do to alleviate that. So a lot of people might know OCD for people who count, or they touch things a certain number of times. They might wash their hands a lot because they're obsessing about germs and contamination and so forth. There's a lot of misunderstandings about OCD as well. So, like, I don't know, for anyone who's been in the corporate world and you've watched a PowerPoint presentation and someone's left a full stop or a period, because I know that's what we call them over here, a full stop in Australia.
Oh,
a period
okay.
At the end of the sentence, right? The little dot for anyone who's listening, at the end of your sentence. And you have someone who goes, oh, my OCD is killing me because there's no dot at the end of that sentence, right? Or there's no comma, or that word doesn't have a capital letter at the start of it. Really pedantic stuff. That's not OCD. That's just someone who likes good grammar in their PowerPoints. Yeah. But you hear it, you hear it trivialized like that. And someone who lives with OCD, I've been in that corporate world where I'm just sitting there going, if only you knew, right? Yeah. So to give you an example, growing up, when I was about 13, mum and dad separated, and me and my little brother went and lived with mum. And I put it on myself. Nobody asked me to do this. I put it on myself that I was now the man of the house. I was the oldest male. And for a long time, I had two older brothers to do that, plus a dad to do that when we lived all together. And so one of my obsessive compulsive things was I'd get this obsessive thought at the end of the day when we're going to bed about, we've got to make sure that this house is locked up like Fort Knox, like nobody's getting into this house, because I worried that if they did, they'd kidnap us, they'd murder us, they'd steal our stuff, and I was really scared about that happening. This mysterious boogeyman who was outside every single night, in fact, every single day as well. And so I would go around the house and check every window and door was locked and closed. Even if it was a beautiful night with a beautiful cool breeze going through to cool the house down, that house was locked up. There was no way that someone was getting into that house. And I'd go to bed. So I'd do the rounds throughout the whole house. I'd go to bed. And then my brain would say, Simon, did you really check that window? And that's the intrusive thought comes in. I'm like, I don't know now. I'm doubting myself now. So I've got to get up and go check that window. But it wasn't just checking that window. I would have to check the whole house again. And then I'd go to bed, and then my brain would say, Simon, in the process of checking the front door, you touched it, because I had to touch it and hear a certain click or thud or something like that to know it was just right. In the process of touching that, you walked away and somehow it's just unlatched itself.
Yeah.
And open. Now, most doors don't do that. But my brain would tell me that. And so I'd have to get up out of bed again and go do this again and go check it. But not just the door, it was the whole thing again. This process lasted, on average about 3, maybe 5 hours a night for me as a 13-year-old boy in the dark. So this is before iPhones and I had cameras on our phones and lights on our phones and all that type of stuff. So in the dark and so quiet because I didn't want to wake mum up or my little brother. And so I was basically sneaking around my own house in the dark doing these things, checking things, going to bed, and never told a soul until that diagnosis at 28 years old. Right?
Did your mom know or anything?
No, not. This is one of the many things I've done, and not a single person has ever questioned or queried why I do certain things. This is that mask that I did it all internally. Like I did it so that people didn't see. I don't know why. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was confusion or fear or something like that. So that was the biggest thing for me on my OCD, and that's stuck with me. I'm 40 now. I still do this type of stuff. I don't do it for 3 hours anymore. So I'm managing to cope with it. But now, as a dad, and more recently, we sold our house, and it was a house that was just a single-story house, standard house, nothing fancy about it. And for the last 3 or 4 months, we've been living in a resort because we're just waiting to buy our new house. And this resort, we're on the level 1. And so it's the lowest level because I asked for that because I'm scared of heights. And having a balcony.
I am too. There's no shame. I am too. Don't worry about it. And to the point where, this is the helicopter dad, if my kids are on the balcony, my obsessive compulsive brain's going into overdrive. It's like, what happens if the balcony breaks, like the railing breaks and they topple over? Because I have a fear of falling as well. Like, what if they topple over and they die? Or what if they climb up on it when I'm not watching because kids have kids and they're adventurous and they fall off? What happens if the balcony itself, which is made of concrete and steel, collapses, like you see on the news sometimes? And so I'm like, get off the balcony. Just come away from the edge all the time. My kid's like, Dad, it's okay, we're all right. But in my brain, I'm trying to protect. And the thing with an OCD brain is we do these things because we're worried about a catastrophe happening. Like for when I was growing up, like this murderer coming into the house, or, at the resort for the kids falling off the balcony, and I worry that if I don't do certain actions, in the absence of my actions, something bad's going to happen. So with me, if I said to them, go on the balcony, do what you want, and then something happened, I would block the amount of shame and guilt I would have because I didn't do enough as a dad to go and keep them safe. So that's one, a very recent one, and it goes into the middle of the night now. So when they're in bed, I've got this worry that because the windows don't close very well here, and this is, I guess, part of me. Like I like houses that are like Fort Knox because I know that they're locked up,
And so the windows, because this is an old resort, like the windows don't close properly. And so I worry that in their sleep, they might open the window and fall out and fall down one story, because one of the kids haven't got a fly screen on it. Not that a fly screen is going to really protect anyone going through it, but,
Yeah.
like it's some level of protection. And
Mm.
so now in the middle of the night, I'm getting up just to double check, is that window closed, or, is everything safe and secure? And so I'm catching myself in these moments now, and I'm thinking about it like, is this me being a parent, or is this my OCD telling me I need to do these things? And a lot of it is just the OCD. So I'm trying to, as best as I can, using all these therapy tools that I've got, to stop myself and allowing my kids to just be kids and relaxing a
Yeah.
little bit and letting them be on the balcony and go up to the edge and look down over the railing. And some days I'm automatic. I'm like, get away, get away, get away. Other days I'm breathing through it. I'm like, just trying to stop, like you were at the playground, just trying to hold it in and let them grow. And it's a real challenge. And the OCD just gets in the way so much. But in saying that, and for anyone listening who might have something like OCD or a mental health condition, is that the tools do work when you learn it and you do the
Yeah.
homework. And that's what I'm sitting with, like, breathing, for example. Or I ask myself this really cool question at the moment called, and I say it out loud, is this helpful? Is it helpful for me to be up in the middle of the night checking windows when I know that they're safe? Is it helpful for me to tell them to get off the balcony when I know it's pretty safe? Like, we have a pretty good building code in Australia. It's unlikely
Mm.
that that balcony is going to fall down, and so forth. So I'm telling myself these things. I'm using tools which I've learned through therapy, and so it is possible to work through it. It is difficult at the same time.
Yeah. No, I can totally understand it. So I have ADHD, and so you were mentioning, the about the obsessing over this one thing and just lives in your head, right? So with me, man, if there's something comes to my head and I say I want to do this thing, it doesn't leave. It does not leave my head. Well, it does until I either forget, I do it, or it's the next day and I'm on to something new where I'm like, this is my new obsession, and so I totally get that, because man, like with me, I have to. It feels like if this thing doesn't happen, if I don't have this thing, and I say have the same day, I needed an air compressor, and I was doing a project in the house, and I was like, I need this air compressor, or this whole project's gonna fail. Just completely, just like it's not going to fail, but like in my head, I'm like, I need this, and so I spent an entire afternoon, trying to find an air compressor, talking to different people on Facebook Marketplace, all these things. Never got the air compressor. Never got the air compressor, but I wasted an entire afternoon because I finally had to, like, I'm obsessing over this, like, and I need to stop. I need, hyper, for me, it's like hyper fixation. I'm like, it's there. I got it. I got to do it. You know what I mean? So I totally understand that. It was a frustrating thing because, similar to you, I didn't get the diagnosis for ADHD until I was 28 years old. And it was like a weight that had been lifted off my shoulders. To finally have, like you talked about, right? To have that, a name associated with the thing, that the characteristics that made me who I was, and even different from a lot of my peers who I noticed didn't do or say or act the way I did. You know what I mean? And so it was relieving, but then it was also one of those things. Okay, now I have a name for it. Is everything I associated with ADHD, or is it just these certain quirks? You know what I mean? And so I've been doing different things. I do take medication for it, which I am grateful for, because it definitely has helped me in a lot of different ways. But similar to you, yes, I definitely understand where you're coming from, and anybody out there who has ADHD or has OCD or anything, a mental illness to that effect, you can understand and relate completely. So I wanted to ask you though about, you mentioned about your parents separating, and how you said this obsession that this boogeyman, right, was going to come to your house. Do you think it had to do and forgive me, I might be analyzing you, but do you think it had to do with your parents separating, and then you being more, like you said, I'm the oldest son here, like I'm essentially the man of the house. Do you think that thought had to do with you putting yourself in that position, or feeling you need to put yourself in that position, and you're no longer having your dad or your older brothers there?
Yeah, absolutely. And the OCD was there before that, and it
Right,
wasn't around
100%.
that. Like it completely evolved from. So to give you the idea, so it started what I trace back to around 8 years old in the schoolyard. And another student said to me, Simon, if you stop using your voice for more than a minute, you're going to lose it forever. And most people would laugh that off and go, whatever, dude, go F off or whatever. We said at the schoolyard. But I held on to that and I believed
Mhm.
that. And part of the reason I think that it affected me so much was because up until that point, mum would always like tell me that I was this happy-go-lucky kid, always laughing, smiling, nothing could faze me. And the thought of losing my voice meant that I couldn't do those things anymore. And that
Yeah.
really scared the hell out of me. And so, in order to alleviate that obsessive thought, I started humming to myself like every other minute, go, just checking that that voice was still there. And so that's where it started. And then over time, it evolved into this checking of their house when we did separate. And to give that some context, so I grew up in a place called Adelaide, so it's in South Australia. So I'm living in Queensland now, so a different state altogether, in the northern suburbs of it. So this is very working class. There's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of welfare. A lot of crime, you could say. There was a lot of gang stuff. So when I say gangs, like I'm talking about bikies and stuff like that in this area. The environment itself, and a lot of our mental health conditions and the way we parent as well, it's informed by the environment that we grow up in. And so I was always on edge. As I got older, as I became more aware of that environment, of what was going on. And you'd see it when you go to your friend's house and see how their dads were, or if their dads weren't there. And there was a lot of drinking, for example, and drinking's a big part of my story too. But we saw it on TV, what we watched on TV. So, having my older brothers at home, we'd always watch what they wanted to watch. And that would be The Terminator, Die Hard, Rambo, like these hyper masculine movies, which I love, absolutely love. But they show a hero that would get, stabbed, shot, walk through fire, blown up, and still survive, still push through. Not a single tear, And so this is
Yeah.
what I'm getting informed. Okay, this is what it is. At the time, me and my little brother, we were really into our wrestling. So our WCW wrestling at the time. And I've come to learn, I'm going to say if it's real or not. I'll let everyone make their own decision. But back then, we'd watch on a Saturday afternoon. It was on Saturday afternoon here in Australia, and we would love it, and we would emulate those wrestlers, and throw ourselves off the bed or off the lounge onto each other, and go at it for basically 3 hours straight until we just pass out of exhaustion. No one ever won because we refused to let up. But this is the kind of environment. And so it continued in the schoolyard. You definitely, with your mates, I was very probably alpha male. We all grew up playing Australian rules football. This was a very tough physical sport. So at the schoolyard, I would be very much that alpha male, like the jock kind of guy as well. And then, as I said, we played a lot of sport. And so always trying to be the best at everything. And there was no room for emotions or anything like that. And so that all influenced the way that I saw myself. And so when mum and dad separated and I had to become this man of the house, it was because that's how I understood what it meant to be a boy and a man, was to be someone who provided and kept people safe, like those movies, for example. But someone who didn't share what was going on inside, because all my idols didn't talk about stuff. My dad never showed emotion. The only time I've ever seen him cry was watching Forrest Gump when Jenny died. And that was one moment in my 40-year history. The only time I've ever seen him cry was watching Forrest Gump. And I'm like, and I often reflect on this, and I'm like, why is that the case? But then as I do my work in my therapy business of guys who are similar age to my dad, and, even guys similar age to us and younger, these notions of what it means to be a boy and a man continue through the generations. So it's defined by these environments and how we parent, So you think about the parenting journey. And I remember when my son was born, my wife and I said, we looked at each other and we go, we want him to kind of evolve his own identity. We want him to just grow into this beautiful person that he's going to be, this human. And one of the first conversations we had was, what color clothes are we going to put on him? What kind of clothes? You go to the shops and it's blue for boys, pink for girls. That's from day one. Like, that's what it is. And we were like, well, if he wants to wear pink, should we let him? And the answer was, of course, yeah. And so then that creates a discussion that a lot of parents have, is about how do we, and and taking that a step backwards, is like baby reveals. You pop the balloon or whatever, and it's either blue comes out or pink comes out. And there's no questions asked. But imagine like having a baby, a newborn son, and instead of putting a blue t-shirt on with fire truck on it or whatever, happens, you put a pink t-shirt on. The questions that get asked for that. You do the same for a girl and nothing gets asked. Like, if you put a blue t-shirt on a girl, it's like, oh, cool, she's wearing a blue t-shirt. You put a pink t-shirt on a boy, what's going on? What's happening at your household? And so there's all these environmental things, what I've come to learn as social constructs of masculinity and gender. These are all socially constructed. We as humans put these definitions on our kids. And I guess even mental health labels or conditions are a definition of something. We have to find a label for something. So you're this or you're that. This is where you fit in the world. And so certainly when mum and dad separated, as I said before, like, I felt this need to be another label, to be the man of the house, and I still feel that to this day. Although these days, I draw a lot of strength from my wife on also being a protector and someone who keeps us safe, because she's kept me safe for so long. Like, she was the first one who gently encouraged me to go and see someone, and has supported me over 10, 12 years now of a recovery pathway. And this is where I guess I fall down, is I'm very quick to see what I need, but I don't see what she needs as often as I should, because I'm in my own head so much. And it comes from this pressure that I put on myself to be this man, but also I guess now be this mental health advocate as well for men. I need to be vulnerable. I need to be authentic, because otherwise I feel like I'm living a lie as well. And so it's a complex, I guess, response to probably what seems like an easy question, but at the same time, it's not an easy question. And so many dads and guys struggle with this. And I guess they're hesitant to come into, say, therapy, because they're questioning this identity piece. They're like, am I really man enough if I show emotions or come and talk to you or whatever, or get a label? Does that mean I'm broken? Does that mean I'm not a good enough dad? And the answer to those is no. It's like, it just means you're human, and that we as guys need to support each other and inspire each other. And we're doing this right now through this episode of highlighting just how easy it is to talk, and we should talk, and it's healthy and it's good, it's masculine, it's strength, it's courage. And then the more we can do that, the better dads we can become.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. I think a lot of it is being having that fear of being vulnerable in any sort of way, because we have, as you said, watching Terminator, Die Hard, Die Hard 2. Those are two distinct, different movies, by the way, people. If you haven't seen Die Hard or Die Hard 2, number 2, I'm gonna tell you right now, you're living under a rock. But anyway, that being said, we watch these movies, what is it, John McClane, and you see this masculine man, and I even think in Die Hard he has a daughter, right? And he's just this very overprotective dude, where he's just like, at all times he always has his gun with him, and he's just like, he's gonna shoot somebody, you know what I mean? And but that's just that level of what the emphasis of what a man is and what a man looks like, or supposed to be. It's almost imprinted on us from such a young age, especially being exposed to what we are exposed to now with what's on television and whatever the case might be. So, I wanted to ask you, a lot of men. So you're older, a little older than I am. I say a little. I'm trying to be generous here. I'm almost 30. You're 40. You're about 10 years older than I am. Okay, so but you have a lot more life experience than I do, and so growing up, I'm sure it was similar, especially for anyone who grew up in the 70s, 80s, and very different time. It was, like you mentioned, you never see your dad cry. Your dad didn't. Our fathers didn't cry. And if they did, something had to be terribly wrong for them to be in tears and for us to see it. You know what I mean? And so with this image, you never see your dad vulnerable, or how to have that emotional intelligence, if you will, to be what vulnerability looks like, and being able to kind of acknowledge to your kids, like, hey, I am upset. I'm upset because, today it's just a bad day at work, and, kind of having that talk with your kids so they can see and understand, like, oh, okay, my dad can have a bad day. Right? He's just not this happy-go-lucky guy, or he doesn't only give me two emotions, angry or happy. You know what I mean? I wanted to ask you, what do you think the hardest part, or I don't want to say what do you think? How do I phrase this? Do you think because of those images that we've seen and we've had in our places, but even now, and kids growing up now, like Gen Zers, and it's different than it used to be, but even then you still notice a trend. Do you think that we're doing something wrong when we're trying to build that toughness for when we're raising boys to become men? Because I know a lot of parents do it. It's like, hey, I need you to be tough because the world's not going to be easy on you, and you have to have some it's almost like a shield on you at all times to protect you. So do you think as parents, they're doing something wrong, or there's something they could be doing better to help, especially young men, when they grow up to become men, and then even dads, and raise their kids?
It's a really good question. And I guess the difference between when I grew up and when my son's growing up, he grows up in the age of social media and technology. Like, I didn't have a mobile phone, until I was the end of high school. And then I had three for some reason. I don't know why. A lot of us, none of them had credit. None of them had credit on them. And all we did was we had them because they had different ringtones and different games that we could play on it, like Snake and Snake 2.
Snake, I remember that one.
Two very different games as well. But I never rang anybody from these three phones. And all of my friends had the same. We all had these hand-me-down phones from our family. But my kids and my son and my daughter, they're going to grow up in a world of iPhones. I already know how to swipe right and swipe left and put in PIN codes and all that type of stuff. In fact, I actually worry if they can even ring 000 emergency or 911 over there. Because we don't have
000?
Yeah, 000 over here.
It's such an easy thing to remember. Listen, America, figure it out. 000. Oh my goodness. All you have to do is 0. Oh my goodness. Obviously 911, everybody knows 911, but still, there was a lot easier numbers out there, and I feel like we missed something here. I feel like we missed the mark, but anyway, I digress. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, the point of that is that, I grew up with a phone on the wall, right? And
Home
you can
phone.
pick it up, go, it was 000. And that was easy. But now, in an age, we don't have phones anymore. We have mobiles, and we walk around with them all day. So I often think as a dad, what would happen if there's an emergency and I'm on the ground, my wife's not around, and my kids would need to pick up the phone or find a phone first, pick it up, and then know how to navigate through it to get to 000. So there's that element. I mean, I know you can go on, there's an emergency button on the phones. I'm talking about iPhone here as well. But how do they do that? It's a different world, and then they're bombarded by social media. And luckily, my kids aren't on social media at the moment. They're too young. But I know the time will come when social media is a thing for them, and so they're getting this 24/7 barrage of content. A, content from all over the world, but B, the stuff that you hear about, cyberbullying and picking on kids and all this type of stuff. And I never had any of that. My stuff was all in my head. It was literally in the schoolyard, yeah. Certainly there's bullies there and all that type of stuff. But with an OCD brain, I made up a lot of my fear and anxiety. In fact, if I got help for it around 8 years old, I wonder if my childhood would look very different. If I would be what I feel like is a stronger kind of dad as well. And so there's two generations there, and then you got other generations before me and so forth. And in between as well, the generations between, they're all very different, but they're all very the same in terms of what does it mean to be a boy and a man. And so as dads, we talked about right at the start, me feeling this shame about automatically doing what I learned and from my parents. My dad yelled, so I automatically yelled. And so a lot of the stuff that we do as parents, it's not wrong, it's just the only way we know. And often it's automatic. So I went into automatic mode when I was with my kids, because that's the only version of parenting I knew, was what my parents had. My wife's side is very different. So I come from a very small family where it's just mum, dad, my brothers, and we don't really have an extended family. Like we do, but we never were in contact with them. Whereas my wife's side of the family, there's thousands of them. Like they're literally
Yeah.
thousands, like they're rabbits. I don't know what's going on. But there's aunties, there's cousins, you name it, they've got it in their family. And so they saw lots of different male role models from all the different families and all the cousins and see how they all brought up. And so they can draw from a lot. And so when my wife became a parent, like she had younger kids, like her sister is 20 years younger than her. So she was the oldest and her sister was like
20
the
years?
youngest,
Holy
about 20
crap.
years. And so when we got together and around the time of my diagnosis, we actually moved to be closer to her family so that she could be around her sister when, did I say daughter or sister before? I don't know.
Sister. You said sister.
Yes,
Yeah.
I did. Good. Her sister was 2,
Wow.
and so we're grown, and so she wanted to be around it. So she was around a lot of young kids and saw people parent in different ways, whereas I had a very small version of what that looked like based on my nuclear family. And so that's what I had to grow up with. And then in the work that I do with guys, they talk about very similar things. Like the only thing that they know about parenting is just what their parents did to them, and particularly their dads did to them, or if their dads were absent, like a stepdad or an uncle or something like that, or what they learn on TV. And so I often, in the parenting space, when parents are being hard on themselves, we often just like to say, like, you're just doing the best with what you know.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean what you know is right. And particularly when we're looking
Yes.
at things, this concept around toxic masculinity at the moment. We talked about family domestic violence a bit earlier about what's happening here in Australia. And there's a lot of questions on current age dads about what are you doing to raise your sons to respect women better and girls better. And a lot of that discussion is around just because of how you were parented back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, whenever it was, noughties, whenever it was, it doesn't mean we have to continue that. We actually need to be the change. So modern day dads, like, come on board and say, you know what, I'm going to do it differently. Like, I'm not going to yell, or at least I'm not going to try to yell,
Yeah.
I'm not going to smack. I'm not going to say derogatory things to my son, or encourage that or laugh about that. We're going to be choosy on what we watch on TV and challenge things that come up on the radio or what people are talking about so that we can know, or we can evolve this notion of what it means to be a boy and then ultimately a man and then a dad as well, in the future generations. And so we can be the change. We don't have to settle for what has come before us and what we know. We can learn and grow. And I think that's what mindfulness is for me. My brand's Mindful Man. It's about being mindful about our past, our present, and where we want to go in the future, and where's the gap there, and where do we want to evolve things. And I think parenting and fatherhood is a great space to show our future, or our sons and our daughters, and just what it means to be a better man, and be a good man, and be someone with values and ethics and morals, and can impart that knowledge and wisdom onto future generations, but also onto our friends and their kids, and our colleagues and their kids as well. So it's not just about our nuclear family, it's about our entire community as well. And so it's about, to round back, it's about just doing what you know, and that's okay. Like there's no wrong with that. But then if you identify a part of your parenting, maybe like a smack or a yell or a derogatory comment, whatever it is, knowing that you can change that and evolve that. And in fact, that's a good thing. That means that's a modern day parent. That's the new age dad, which is a really cool thing to be in as a new age parent, to have this, I guess, this permission to change things. I think for so many generations, there was no permission. It was like, this is how it is, because you need to be strong, you need to be tough. But the new age parent, I think, can be a lot more than that. Someone who's progressive.
I think that we can, evolving, and we have evolved, from generations to generations, right? And understanding new things and whatever, what have you, things that change, that society changes over time. But I think that, one thing that we can pull from the old as well as pull from the new, and more is to combine them and make something new, if you will. And, I do believe that, for any kids, even my daughters are sons are daughters, right? Because hopefully I can have two sons here, but in the future. But I'm, if when I'm raising my sons, I'm raising my daughters. My hope is that both of them have that that toughness, that mental toughness. I think it's so important, to have that, because when you step off, if you will, into the realm of adulthood, or into that you're your own person, if you will, and you're taking on the new challenges in life on your own for the first time, I think that I want to prepare my kids as much as possible. And it's not to say that they need to get beat up every day to learn what it is to be tough, right? But no, but it is, I do believe that there are lessons that need to be instilled, and values, and that are important, so that they have to overcome those challenges that come with life as they get older, especially, like I said, when they become adults and they're stepping off into the world for the first by themselves. So I do think there's a part of the old that we definitely can bring in, and there's part of the new that we definitely can bring in. I know gentle parenting is the thing. A lot of people like to put a title on it, if you will, as the new parenting style. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of aspects that I enjoy of it, of talking to my kids and getting kind of understanding, okay, why are you upset? Do you understand why you're crying, or whatever the case might be? But I can also respect the other side of it, where it was like, hey, all right, I understand that you're upset, but like, it's time to knock it off, right? It's not to say, hey, you've had enough crying, but it's like, hey, hey, it's time to tighten up. All right, I understand you're upset. Let's figure out a new way of vocalizing yourself being upset, rather than just throwing a temper tantrum because you're not getting your way. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's about balance as well, isn't it? Like, it's about finding the right of both, errors, and going, okay, and evolving, and there's no playbook. It's like each family's different, each context
100%.
is different. You walk out into a war zone, for example, about what's happening around the world, and you got to be tough.
Yeah.
That's survival. Or if you're, here in somewhere like Australia, where it's pretty carefree, like you're not like going to war every day in a lot of cases. Some areas, yeah, you are, but not in every case. And so it's about finding balance and what works for your family, but also, I guess, being open to evolving that and changing that where it's not serving us anymore. And also, I guess, where we want to lead our sons particularly, and our daughters in the future too.
I wanted to ask a final question here, and that was, we, with all of these diagnoses, right? I say diagnosis, but these labels that just to help us associate certain attributes or characteristics with ourselves, right? OCD, depression, anxiety, ADHD, all these things, right? Think you working in that sphere, in that realm, do you think there's an overusage or an overdiagnosis of these things, especially on younger kids, when it's like, no, that's just that kid's just and they're taking that into adulthood, saying, no, I have this problem, I have this issue, I've been told my entire life, when it was that parent, maybe that parent just didn't allow them to be a kid, whatever the case may be. I don't want to answer the question for you, but do you think there's an overusage and overdiagnosis of these things, of these mental illnesses that we have, that we know about?
I don't think it's an overdiagnosis. I think it's just a recognition that we're in an era where we can diagnose earlier. And so there's a lot of a lot of people that I work with who are diagnosed late. A lot of dads, for example, they're going through maybe an ADHD or an autism. This is the two big ones here that I'm seeing. An autism assessment with their children because they're misbehaving, or they're not focusing, or they're struggling at school, or whatever. And then from that, they get their own diagnosis, because they're like, hang on a second, my son or daughter have been doing this. They're getting diagnosed. I've been doing the same thing for 20, 30, 40 years as well. And so they get a diagnosis as well. And so I think it's less about overdiagnosis and more about ability to diagnose. The challenge therein, and I think you were spot on there, is about taking that and embodying that and saying, I'm just OCD, like that's my personality. It's like, no, I live with it. I'm so much more than that. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a bloke, I'm whatever. I'm more than my diagnosis. So it's about, I find that there's power in knowledge. And I find that there's power in understanding, okay, you've got ADHD. Cool. What do we do with that? How do we manage that so that we can be the best person that we can be? So is it medication? Is it therapy? Is it doing certain techniques, breathing, meditation, mindfulness, whatever it is that works for you so that you can just be the best person that you can be, and it's about moving from that embodiment. And we see a lot of people embody it. And sometimes I feel like I'm embodying it. I feel like I'm embodying a men's mental health advocate a lot. because I am a men's mental health advocate. I'm also a men's therapist.
Yeah.
Some days I'm just like, I'm so tired of this. Like, I just need a break. And so I disconnect from that, and I pretend I am not that mental health advocate for a day until I can fill my cup up and feel like I want to put that hat back on. And so it's just about knowing that, being wary of that, and so forth. But I think, the diagnosis is good. It's something, it gives you knowledge. It's not everything though, and you can move past it, and you can heal from and you can recover from a lot of mental health conditions, or you can manage them really well. I think you're in the military, and I've looked at jobs previously where I've like, I'd love to do that job, but it says on there that you've got to be mentally well or fit. And so I've avoided that. I think, in Australia here, I'm hearing a lot of, stuff around they're accepting more mental health conditions in things like the military or police or fireys or AMBOs, because they recognize that it's not a death sentence. It's actually something you can manage, and you can manage well and still perform and still be awesome at your job. And so I think we're starting to evolve the mental health discussion as well, to note that it's not just a lifelong jail sentence. It's something that it's just part of us. It's our human nature as well. So, yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of people, especially in those jobs that tend to be high stress, like the military, like the police or firefighters, what the case may be. There's a lot of people who had to hide that part of them in order to have or find that success and reach that form of success that they have, or where they're currently at, and now they're finally able to. But I asked that question only because in the military, as I'm now an old head, part of the older generation, of soldiers and leaders, and so I see the differences in a lot of soldiers. And one of the things is there's a lot of mental health things going on, but sometimes it could, instead of saying, "Wow," like you mentioned, like, "Hey, it's a part of me, and I don't want it to be a lot of the newer generation soldiers that I'm experiencing, and not just soldiers, but more people in general out there in the world right now, it seems as they almost want to use it as a crutch, because it's an excuse from them to stay where they are, rather than progress and figure out, how do I navigate through this minefield, if you will, of depression or of anxiety or ADHD or OCD or whatever, insert, mental illness thing here, right? And so I asked that question because sometimes it does seem like, okay, well, if you're using it as a crutch, do you really have depression? Or are you just saying that because it's an easy cop out, because you don't, or whatever the case might be? And that's why I asked that question. Not to say people don't have these things, but it is concerning. I'm sorry, I said one more, but I have two, and I promise then we can be done. I promise. I don't always take it. The first question is, geez, now I forgot what it was going to be, but I wrote down the other one now, so I see the other one. So if you had any advice for dads who have mental illness, what would that be, right? I know that's a very general question, and there could be a broad answer there, but right now, the audience out there listening, who are going to watch this and see this and hear our conversation, what do you think would be something that would stick with them if you had to leave? If you could leave them?
Yeah, I think it comes down to thinking about, what kind of dad do you want to be? Like, of all the dad and father figures that in your world, or you've witnessed, or maybe you've listened to this podcast and heard another dad before and gone, he's got it all together, or I wish I was more like him, is just really reflect on that. Like, do you want to be the best dad in the world, or the best dad that you can be? Do you want to be present with your kids? Do you want them to be really happy around you? Do you want to have all these magical moments and really cherish that? I mean, most dads do. What we often do, though, is we get caught up in life. We live life on autopilot, and we prioritize our work, for example, over spending quality time. Like, I do this at home. I'm self-employed. I work from home, and I'm often sending out emails at all sorts of weird and wonderful times, depending on where you are in the world when you get my emails.
Yeah.
And my kids will come in and say, Dad, can we do this? And I'm like, no, I've got 5 more minutes. And it ultimately becomes an hour or two of me working. I'm prioritizing work. I'm not prioritizing fatherhood and being with my kids. There'll come a time when my kids don't come in the door anymore and ask to spend time with me. They'll want to do their own thing, and then eventually they'll leave and move out, when they're older. And so it's about recognizing, what kind of dad do you want to be? And with a mental health condition is recognizing as well that it's okay to be not okay. Like Simon's got this OCD thing, Quan's got this ADHD thing. Like we're still kicking it. We're still living the life and doing what we got to do and thriving, not just surviving. We're actually out there thriving, and you can do that too. And so it's about recognizing that it's not weak to speak and that I can talk about these things, and I might get a label, but it's manageable. It's not a life sentence. You might have it for life, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stop you from living life.
Yeah.
And so once you've identified those two things, what kind of dad you want to be, and then it's not weak to speak, is that, okay, how do we get to that point where you're being and living that dad that you want to be? And that could be therapy, it could be medication, it could just be talking to your partner a bit more, saying, oh, this is what's going on, and prioritizing your kids a little bit more and your family a bit more, because those emails will be okay tomorrow, or their budget will be okay tomorrow, or that phone call that you feel like you need to make right now can be made tomorrow. Like, we're in a world where we feel like we're rushing and hustling all the time. We need to do things now, but we can actually stop, pause, and just be dads. And a good example is straight after this is my daughter's homesick. I'm going to go play with some toys after this. I'm not even going to do any work for a couple of hours, and then I'm going to go to work and see a client. But I'm just going to be dad for a while, and that's okay. Like, we're allowed to do that. It's Mother's Day here on Sunday, and my wife is toing and froing with herself. Like, does she go to my son's school? There's a bit of a Mother's Day get together, or does she do work for 2 hours? I'm like, stuff work. Go and have that moment with your son at his school and talk to the other mums and just have fun. Like, that's what parenting is. It's about that prioritization piece. And so probably gave you a few tips there, but hopefully one of them at least stuck with the dads listening out there.
Yeah, no, it's great. And that's the thing. Like, I don't want it to pigeonhole you to one piece of advice, right? But, if I phrased the question that way, but I didn't mean to. But, I think it's awesome. You have a lot of experience, you have a lot of knowledge, and especially the profession that you're in. It helps the dads in my audience and even your audience as well to kind of hear these things, so they can say, okay, it's okay, it's all right, I can go be a dad. You know what I mean? I don't need to sit here after this and start immediately editing. I can press pause and I can go be a dad. And you laugh because I know edits and all that thing. It's a fun time, but you can go be a dad and just enjoy that time in the presence of. Other than that, we're gonna have to reconvene again. I enjoy the conversation with you, and enjoy the time that we had together, even when I was on your podcast. But we can definitely get together again and have a more in-depth. Everything for Simon will be in the description below the podcast, and that's just like, I want to let you guys know that's like a small piece of what he really does. It's an important piece for him, of course, but it's a small piece of what he does, and playing a part to the bigger picture of what he does. So his website will be in the description, so you can check it out. I highly encourage you to check it out. And if you're in Australia, the Australia area, local area, right, by all means, reach out. And then obviously in the United States, do by all means reach out and see if you guys are able to connect and able to work that out. I know there's the cool insurances and all that, so obviously play a part of where you're from, but still, nonetheless, still reach out, still can talk to. His website is full information and how you can do all that. But other than that, guys, thank you for joining us, Simon. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. And hey, guys, being mediocre is a choice. You have to refuse to be mediocre.